He told me he loved me, but I discovered a dark secret on his cell phone. I wished it was infidelity, but it was something much worse. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to pour my heart out on the internet, but here I am. I can't tell this story to anyone in my real life. Not to my family, not to my closest friends, not even to a therapist. It's too dangerous, and even if I tried, I don't think they'd believe me. But I need to let it out somewhere, or it'll eat me alive. This all started about 8 months ago. I met Daniel in the most cliché way possible. At a coffee shop. I was exhausted from work, frustrated, and in desperate need of caffeine. He bumped into me in line and spilled half of his latte on my blouse. I was furious at first, but he was so apologetic, so charming that I couldn't stay mad. He insisted on buying me another drink and gave me this smile that felt like it could melt steel. One conversation led to another, and before I knew it, we were exchanging numbers. Over the next few weeks, we started hanging out more. He was funny, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in me. He remembered small details about my life, asked about my day, and made me feel like I was the only person in the world that mattered. 2 months in, he told me he loved me. I hesitated because it felt fast, but the truth was I was falling too. He made me feel safe in a way no one else ever had. He was kind, affectionate, and thoughtful. He always seemed to have time for me, no matter how busy he claimed to be with his freelance IT work. That was his explanation for why he was always glued to his laptop or phone. He did independent tech jobs for clients who valued discretion. I didn't question it, not at first, but there were little things that didn't add up. He never talked about his family. He said he was estranged but avoided details. He didn't have social media, not even a private Facebook or Instagram. He never left his phone unattended, ever. He carried it into the bathroom, kept it in his pocket while he slept, and locked it instantly after use. I chalked it up to him being private, maybe even paranoid. I didn't want to be that girlfriend who snoops or accuses, but my gut told me something was off. The first real red flag came when I visited his apartment for the first time. We'd been dating for almost 4 months, and until then, he'd always come to my place or suggested we meet in public. When I finally saw his place, I was unsettled. It was spotless, almost sterile. Gray furniture, bare walls, no family photos, no mementos, nothing that said, "This is who I am." That night, after dinner and a movie, we fell asleep on the couch. Around 2 a.m., I woke up needing to pee. When I came back from the bathroom, I noticed his phone charging on the dining table. For the first time, it wasn't glued to his body. My heart pounded. I knew I shouldn't, but I picked it up. The lock screen asked for a pattern. My hands shook as I traced the simplest shape I could think of. To my shock, it unlocked. At first, I just looked for what I expected. Texts from another woman, maybe some dating apps hidden away. I opened the gallery. There were almost no normal pictures. Just screenshots of conversations, blurry photos of streets and license plates, and candid shots of random people who clearly didn't know they were being photographed. My stomach dropped. I opened his files and found a hidden folder. Inside were documents with titles like contacts, transactions, deliveries. I opened one and saw lists of names, addresses, and phone numbers. Next to some of the names were words like delivered, pending, and confirmed. Felt sick. I told myself maybe it was some weird freelance job. Maybe he was a private investigator or something. But then I opened a messaging app one didn't recognize. Something encrypted. There were conversations with someone saved as boss. Target confirmed. Family will be out Friday. Payment received. Proceed. No loose ends. You know what to do. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the phone. My brain screamed at me to stop, to put it back, but I couldn't. I scrolled further and saw more. Conversations about shipments, packages, and cleanups. It was vague, coded, but clear enough. This wasn't IT work. Daniel was involved in something criminal. I put the phone back exactly where it had been and crawled under the blanket before he noticed I was awake. When he wrapped his arm around me and whispered, "I love you," in his sleep, I nearly vomited. The next morning, I told myself maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe I'd imagined it. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces fit together. His secrecy, his odd schedule, the lack of personal history. And then, a week later, I got a text from an unknown number. "You've seen enough. Keep your mouth shut if you want to stay alive." My blood went cold. I looked around my apartment like someone was watching me. Was it Daniel? Was it one of his associates? How did they know? I deleted the text immediately, terrified he'd see it. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dating someone with a secret. I was trapped in something way bigger and darker than I could have imagined. After that anonymous text, I couldn't look at Daniel the same way. Every time he smiled at me, every time he touched me, I felt my skin crawl. My heart used to race with excitement when I heard his footsteps outside my door, but now it raced with dread. I thought about breaking up with him 1,000 times. I rehearsed the words in my head. Daniel, this isn't working. I need space. I'm not ready for something serious. But every version ended the same way in my imagination. His smile dropping, his eyes going cold, his voice low and dangerous. Because here's the thing. Once you know someone has blood on their hands, or at least could, you don't just walk away. I tried to act normal, but I know he noticed something was off. He'd study me sometimes, tilting his head like he could hear my thoughts. Once, while we were having dinner at my place, he set his fork down and said, "You've been distant lately. Is there something you're not telling me?" My stomach dropped, but I forced a laugh. "Work's just stressful. You know how it is." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Stress makes people careless. Careless people make mistakes. The way he said it, it wasn't casual. It was a warning. From that point on, I felt like I was living under surveillance. His phone might have been locked down, but mine wasn't. I started noticing strange glitches. The screen lighting up on its own, battery draining faster than usual, random static in calls. I'm not paranoid, I work in admin, I know enough about tech to recognize signs of spyware. I was being watched. One night, I tried to confront him gently. I asked, "Do you ever track me? Like on my phone?" He looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. "Why would I need to track you if I trust you?" But then he leaned closer and added softly, "Besides, I don't need an app to know where you are. You're always exactly where I want you to be." I didn't sleep that night. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's controlling side surfaced more and more. He'd casually mention things I hadn't told him. Like the time I grabbed lunch with a coworker and didn't post about it, but later Daniel asked, "So how's Sam doing? He's married, right?" His tone was light, but his eyes pinned me down like knives. Or when I came home one evening and found my apartment door unlocked, even though I know I locked it. Nothing was stolen, but a photo on my nightstand was turned face down. My knees buckled when I saw it, because Daniel had once joked that he hated how much I smiled in that picture, how fake it looked. I didn't call the cops. Couldn't. What would I even say? My maybe criminal boyfriend might be breaking into my place, but please don't investigate too hard because I think he's dangerous. Well, that wasn't an option. Instead, I tried to gather more information. I thought maybe if I could collect enough proof, I could run, go to the police with something undeniable. But getting into his phone again was impossible. He'd changed the lock pattern, and he never left it unattended anymore. Then one night, fate intervened. We were at his apartment watching TV when he got up to take a shower. His phone buzzed on the table, and he didn't take it with him this time. Froze. The bathroom door closed, the water started running. My chest hammered so loudly I thought I'd pass out. I grabbed the phone. This time, instead of guessing the pattern, I pressed my thumb against the screen. I didn't expect it to work, but it did. My blood ran cold. Inside, I didn't waste time with a gallery. I went straight to the encrypted app. A new message was there, from boss. "Next job. She's asking too many questions. Handle it." I swear my vision went black for a second. My brain screamed at me. "It's about you. He's talking about you." But before I could take a screenshot or forward it, the water in the shower turned off. Panic surged through me. I locked the phone, put it exactly back on the table, and scrambled to sit on the couch, pretending to scroll through my own phone. When Daniel came out in a towel, he glanced at his phone immediately. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked at me, and I felt like a deer caught in headlights. But then he just smiled and said, "Hungry? I'll order us something." I nodded, but inside I was screaming. That night I barely slept. Every creak in the building, every gust of wind against the window felt like the prelude to something terrible. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of running down endless hallways with Daniel's footsteps behind me. The next morning I checked my own phone. There was a new message from that same unknown number as before. "You're making this harder than it has to be. Walk away while you still can." Walk away? From who? From Daniel. From the whole thing. Was this a warning or a threat? I tried to test boundaries. I told Daniel I needed a weekend to myself, to visit my sister in another city. He didn't argue, didn't protest. He just kissed my forehead and said, "Of course, you deserve a break." But when I got on the bus the next day, I saw a black SUV in my peripheral vision. First, I thought I was imagining it. But every time I looked out the window, it was there, a few cars behind us, never too close, never too far. By the time I reached my sister's, my nerves were shredded. I didn't tell her anything though. I couldn't drag her into this. Instead, I forced a smile, hugged her tight, and spent the whole weekend pretending everything was fine while checking the street outside every 10 minutes. On Sunday night, when I returned home, Daniel was waiting at my apartment door with flowers. "Missed you," he said warmly, handing me the bouquet. But his eyes told me he knew exactly where I'd been, what I'd done, every second of it. And for the first time I realized something chilling. It wasn't just that I was dating a criminal. It wasn't just that I was being monitored. It was that I was already in too deep to ever get out alive. They told me at the warehouse that I should feel lucky. I laughed when I heard it, because there was nothing about that cold fluorescent room with concrete floors and a single barred window that felt lucky. There were 3 other women there when they opened the rusted door and pushed me inside. 2 younger than me, 1 older, all of them hollow-eyed and wrapped in blankets that smelled like mildew. They stared at me like I was the answer to a problem they'd all been given. Daniel stood to the side, not touching me, watching with a look I finally understood. The look I'd seen a few times over the months, the one that belonged to a man who had rehearsed cruelty so many times it sat naturally in his face. Calm, efficient, and bored. He didn't meet my eyes. "Welcome," one of the men said. "Boss, I think." He had the voice I'd out of 100 phone calls repeating in my head. "You did good. You made it easy. Your father understood his options." My father. The word sat in my head like a stone. I had heard a name in passing, a debtor's ledger entry in a corner of Daniel's encrypted files, an offhand phrase. Guarantees from family, and I had not wanted to believe it. But here it was. Everything about me reduced to a string of numbers and a promise that someone else owed them. I wanted to scream until my lungs tore, to call for help until my throat pooled with blood. But the older woman, Marta they called her, reached over and pressed a palm to my knee with a gentleness that made me want to cry. "Don't make a scene," she whispered. "It only makes it worse. Worse than being taken to a warehouse. Worse than being catalogued like merchandise." I didn't think there was anything worse. But Marta's tone suggested otherwise, and the way her mouth tightened told me she'd learned the scale of what worse could mean. They led me to a table and sat me down. A man with a shaved head clicked open a laptop and flicked through photos. Photos of my family, my apartment, my older sister leaving work, my mail carrier, my co-workers. My heart jackhammered when he paused on one. A picture from a week earlier of me hugging my sister at the bus station. They'd been watching everything for months. "We never want to kill collateral," boss said, like it was a courtesy. "It complicates things. People notice. But leverage is tidy. Useful. You're useful. Useful." The word hit me like a physical blow. Useful to do what? To beg. To lead someone into a trap. To be paraded like currency, traded for payment. The range in my head made a cold list of horrible possibilities, all of which ended with someone else's quiet desperation and my own shrinking life. They explained the terms like I was a business partner being briefed on conditions instead of the commodity under negotiation. My father's debt could be reduced if certain favors were performed on schedule. If I cooperated, if I accepted training, stayed compliant, presented a public face, engaged, then there was a path to debt reduction. If not, the ledger stood and the consequences would be more permanent. Begged. I tried to bargain. I tried to tell them things about my life they didn't understand would make me useless to them. That I had nothing of public value, that I was clumsy, that I hated attention. They smiled and said, "You'll be coached." They said these things as if coaching could unmake all the ugliness. When Daniel finally spoke, it was like a chill swept the concrete room. "You were the easiest solution," he said. He reached out and touched my cheek for a moment. An insult because it had none of the warmth that had once fooled me. "I wanted to keep you close." They asked for guarantees. This was the cleanest option. "Please try to understand." Understand. The word was an acid on my tongue. I thought of all the mornings I'd helped him choose shirts, the nights he'd tucked the blanket around me, told me I was safe. I had treated those small moments like an oasis. They had been camouflage, a careful pattern he wore to hide how easily he could hand me over to men who would set deadlines for my life. For days that turned into one long, flattened week, my life became procedure. I learned the schedule of the men who ran things, who to smile for, which name to echo when people asked, "I'm Maria," even though my name is not Maria, to control the narrative. I learned how to stand when someone asked me to, how to answer the phone when it rang in the reception room that connected to other clients. They took photographs, headshots, full body, smiling, serious, and told me how to tilt my chin for the camera to make the product look presentable. What they didn't train me for was what I felt when they stripped away the last of my choice. Rage burned like mercury in my blood. Grief came in sharp waves, about my naive heart and all the small things I had handed him, about my father's failures, about how blind I had been. Shame came next, raw and senseless, for thinking that love could be an anchor. I tried to keep these feelings buried because I'd seen what happened when someone in that place wandered into emotion. They were removed. Not killed, at least not immediately, but shipped somewhere colder and more permanent. The women I'd met in that warehouse wore those edges in their eyes. Once, when I refused to smile for a shot, boss made a private call. The men in the room took the camera and shot me anyway, the flash slamming against my eyeballs. He later placed the photo in a folder labeled non-compliant and told me neutrally that non-compliance cost more of the ledger. Daniel visited irregularly. Sometimes he would stand by the window at the edge of the room and watch me, and sometimes he would sit with me in the makeshift visitors' lounge and talk about the weather like we were two people in love and not two people on opposite sides of a transaction. The duplicity clawed at me. He refused to explain his shrinkage into that other man and always returned to the same platitude. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me from what? From the debts they claimed. From my own father's recklessness. Protecting me by selling me. Once, during an evening shift, a client I later learned was a businessman and a politician in whispers, arrived and sat opposite me. He had been arranged for a public-facing meeting where my face had to be normal and convincing. He took his time looking me over, as if appraising art. There was certainly money present. Envelopes, a hum of discreet negotiation, but I felt the most intense nausea watching how they switched currency for my compliance without a single flicker of conscience. The man smiled at me like I was a trivial convenience. He handed me a receipt and some folded bills that I could not touch without an officer watching me lift them. They were polite, efficient, and practiced. To them, I was a necessity wrapped in a sentence that did not include my name. On the night I finally made the choice I knew I could not unmake, it was raining hard. The storm felt like it had been waiting for me. I had the map in my head, where the van would be waiting, the route, the small choke point on Highway 7 where the escort always scanned documents. I had scraped together a hope that if I staggered into the wrong car and forced the men to admit publicly the ledger's existence, someone would notice. I had no plan, only fury. I was moved at dusk by two men who had once been casual with me, now stern and professional. They placed a blindfold and wrapped my hands. I thought for a blink that this might be it. This would be the moment I slipped and they would decide. The van hummed along, and I could feel the road beneath me like a pulse. I listened for sirens, for the sound of something breaking that might let me out, but there was nothing but the hush of tires. When they stopped, they marched me up concrete stairs and put me into a room I'd never seen. There was a table and a single lamp. Two men sat opposite me and a third, a woman, perched at an angle. The room smelled of cheap perfume and disinfectant. They explained the final terms, quietly and efficiently. There was no shouting, no theatrics, only the cold, logical cadence of a business closing a sale. You will serve, the woman said. You will meet certain people in certain contexts. You will give an account of your father's actions publicly, one that benefits those we are negotiating with. You will make sure he understands the reason he cannot leave his home. In exchange, we will reduce his ledger. It was a hostage exchange dressed up as diplomacy. My voice came out small. And if I disobey? The woman smiled thinly. Disobedience is the thing that destabilizes the network. We cannot risk it. If you disobey, we cannot reduce the ledger sufficiently to avoid further action. It took me a single small moment to realize what further action meant. People disappeared from my life, and I had fed myself a silly script that because they had not come for me violently yet, I might still have time. They didn't need to be violent where they were efficient. They simply moved pieces on a board until the outcome served the ledger, whether that meant my father's credit, someone's political convenience, or their own clean margins. They were not monsters of spectacle. They were accountants who included humans as line items. Over the next months I became a face. I smiled for cameras and rode in cars and sat inside rooms where men made deals. I told the lies they assigned to me, trimmed palatable versions of truth that made my father look like a man who had misstepped, not an animal. I practiced the tilt of head and the laugh. I learned to say, I forgive him, in a public statement until my tongue moved before my heart felt anything. And each time, when the cameras were off and the clients had left, I watched Daniel in the corner counting a small portion of the payoff for himself. Sometimes he would catch my eye and give me a look that was sorrow mixed with calculation, like a man forced to take money he'd counted himself. Once he mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." It was the smallest mercy, but it did not unmake the ledger. I thought that perhaps if I complied enough, if I became useful enough, they would one day let the ledger fade and my father would be safe. If you have read this far, maybe you can see how desperate hope can be rationalized into endurance. You might be thinking I was stupid. Maybe I was. Maybe all of us are when placed in a room and told that survival requires barter. The last thing I did before I stopped being able to write freely was send this post. I wrote in a variation on a typewriter in the reception area late one night when the guards were short-staffed and the window had a gap. I risked more than I can say just to press these words into a machine that left no digital trace. I cannot be sure anyone will read it. If you are reading this, I want you to know what it felt like to be used the way they use people. No fanfare, no moral drama, only the slow arithmetic of choices. I want you to know that the man who told me he loved me put me on a ledger like a business expense and smiled when I learned to smile for cameras. I want you to know that debts ripple and that the people who cause them sometimes trade futures for payments without blinking. I am not a hero in the movie sense. I did not escape in a dramatic blur. I was traded. I learned how to be polite and how to answer questions in a way that would protect someone I had once loved. They still tell me to call him Daniel sometimes. You don't. Names are small, but they anchor you to a life you no longer hold. I wish this ended differently. I wish I could say I fought and won. I wish I could tell you that love saved me or that I turned the ledger on its head. The truth is uglier. I was gentle, scared, and exhausted, and they chose to use me in the cleanest way they could imagine. I was given a role, practiced it until it fit, and performed. If they find this, if someone in the network sees it and decides to erase me, that is their business. If I disappear entirely, then let this be the last smudge of my handwriting, the last thing I pushed into the world that belonged to me alone. They told me I should feel lucky. Maybe I am, in the smallest abstract sense. My father's ledger shrank, there were fewer knocks at the wrong doors. But what is the price of luck when it is paid in people? I am tired. I'm sorry. I am still, in whatever way is left to me, myself enough to write this. If there is any justice in the world, let someone listen to this and not look away. If there is just a sliver of mercy, let this be a warning to anyone whose heart can be charmed into trust. Sometimes the person who says, "I love you," is making an inventory instead. Goodbye.